And what is up? Welcome in. GC Live, Wes Mitchell here. Thursday episode of the show, rolling right along, getting closer and closer to game day. Flying solo for the moment. Chris Clark on the way to Arkansas. We're going to get his final thoughts on this matchup on Friday. For now, it's just me. If y'all have any questions, go ahead and throw them in. We'll do a sort of a Q&A session probably at the end of the show. Going to be joined momentarily by Andrew Hutchinson from bestofarkansassports.com. Excited to hear what Andrew has to say and give us that. Of course, we always try to do that opponent view every single week here on the show. Excited to hear what Andrew can teach us about this matchup. Before we go any further, I got to tell you about our buddy Clint Hammond of the Mortgage Network. Clint, the supporting sponsor, presenting sponsor, however you want to say it, of this show for so long now. So we certainly appreciate Clint. His NMLS number is 71597. See Hammond at mortgagenetwork.com. That's how you can get Clint. And we're going to go ahead and bring up our very, very special guest. Give me one moment there. Bringing Andrew here. It's Andrew Hutchinson from bestofarkansassports.com. Andrew, we appreciate the time today, man. How you doing?
Doing good, Wes. How about you?
We're good, man. We're getting ever closer. It seems like once you get into the season, these weeks just kind of start flying by. Thursday, a couple of days before Arkansas's matchup with South Carolina this weekend. Man, we appreciate you sort of coming on and giving us a little insight on this team. So I always ask our guests first, if a Gamecock fan has not watched a single snap of Arkansas this season so far, what is the first thing they need to know about this opponent for South Carolina in terms of what to expect on Saturday?
Well, I think it starts with the quarterback, KJ Jefferson. You can probably say that about a lot of teams, but KJ Jefferson is a bona fide superstar, in my opinion. He had an incredible first year as a starting quarterback last year. He had a pretty solid game against Cincinnati last week, but he's a true dual threat quarterback, but not your typical like flashy, I'm going to outrun you. He's going to run right through you. He's drawn some comparisons to Cam Newton just because of his body type and running style. I'm not going to sit here and tell you he's as good as Cam Newton. That would be foolish. But he's kind of got that same style. But he also has a really good arm. I think he's improved tremendously since he's gotten on campus as a passer. And Arkansas has got a pretty good array of wide receivers. No single guy like Treylon Burks last year, but several guys that could, are capable of beating you. So that's probably the first thing I would say is KJ Jefferson, both as a runner and a passer, to also complement what I think is a dominant run game. So that's probably the number one thing I'd have to tell you about Arkansas.
Yeah, and I think just outside looking in, man, that's got to be the first thing. You throw the game on from last week, and then going back to last year as well, just the numbers he was able to put up as a runner and a passer. It seems like there are weapons around him. So it's not one of these things where, at least from this perspective, it's like he doesn't have to do it all, but it certainly like starts with him when you're kind of having the Arkansas offense conversation. You just talked about it a little bit, but what improvements have you most seen as far as just things you've heard throughout the offseason, and then obviously the one game sample size? What have you seen him work on the most, do you think, this offseason?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing he's improved, not just this offseason, but throughout his career, is his accuracy. That was a major concern the first couple of years when he redshirted, and then also the year he backed up Felipe Franks in 2020. I was really concerned based on what we'd seen in practice about just the sheer accuracy. And Kendall Briles, the offensive coordinator, told media last year that his goal was for him to complete 65% of his passes. And I vividly remember sitting in that press conference and saying to myself, there is no way this guy's going to complete 65% of his passes. And yet all he does is go out and complete 67% of his passes last year, the second best completion percentage in school history. And I think he's just gotten better at that. I think he's gotten better at his reads. He's not a guy where, of course, last year, basically he would he'd take his first read, and then if it wasn't there, he'd just go find Treylon Burks, which, again, that's a good strategy when you got a guy like Treylon Burks who can go up and get it. 50-50 balls are more like 75-25 balls with Treylon Burks. This year, I think he does a better job of going through his progressions. I think that helps. He's done a really good job of keeping his eyes downfield when he does move in the pocket. So I think that's probably the biggest area he's grown. And and really he's always been a really good leader. But I think he's been better at being a vocal leader this year. He's not vocal by nature, but you kind of have to be as a quarterback, and I think he's improved that as well, just being more of a vocal guy instead of just leading by example.
Again, we're joined here by Andrew Hutchinson, best of ArkansasSports.com. If you want to see the Arkansas view, head on over and check out the website. Andrew, you brought up, their receivers from last year. They've brought in some transfers the last couple of seasons. It's like an all transfer group there. It seems like, talk about just a view of where we are in the transfer world. You've got two former teammates, Rattler, and Jayden going up against each other. Two guys that are receivers for Arkansas were players where Beamer was at Georgia and Oklahoma, two different spots. So kind of wild. What have you seen from just maybe a little bit of a new look group there? A wide receiver, I think, transitioning to tight end as well. It's kind of weird how there are those connections to Beamer, but how has that group looked so far?
They have been better than expected. I had serious concerns about the wide receivers back during fall or spring ball. And then, of course, Jayden Hazelwood, he never really flashed. Like he was here during the spring, and you're like, okay, when's this guy going to show us the 5-star talent that he has? And it never really happened. He was a little bit dinged up in the spring. But then during fall camp, he kind of kicked it up a notch, and you're like, okay, this guy's a definite starter. Then, of course, you've got Matt Landers, who began his career at Georgia way back when Shane Beamer was there as an assistant coach. Went to Toledo last year, put up some really good numbers over the last 5 games of the season. I mean, just incredible numbers. Averaged like 25 yards a catch, almost 100 yards a game. So he's a guy that I was a little bit like, okay, what's this guy going to be? Is he going to be a complimentary piece, a guy that maybe plays a little bit? But he's been a real big surprise. He got here over the summer. He's like 6'5" with legitimate speed. You don't really see a combination of that size and speed very often. I think his biggest issue back at Georgia, where he didn't play a whole lot, he played some, was just being consistent and catching the ball. I think finally, he's a 6-year senior, so he's finally kind of, things are starting to click for him, and he's starting. And then, of course, the third starting wide receiver is also a transfer, but he was here last year, and Warren Thompson, a guy that started his career at Florida State and actually played for Kendall Briles there, and then followed him here to Arkansas after a year. He's a guy that is another guy that played and put up some decent numbers last year. But he's a guy that, even though he didn't really show it in the first game against Cincinnati, is one that Sam Pittman has said made just tremendous strides from last year to this year. So all 3 of the starting wide receivers are guys that transferred in to Arkansas. And then your tight end that you mentioned, a former wide receiver turned to tight end, is Trey Knox. He had a really good freshman year under the previous regime, Chad Morris and company. Then he had a sophomore slump in Sam Pittman's first season, was looking like he was going to hardly do anything as a junior. And honestly, I started thinking maybe this guy's going to hit the transfer portal because he's a heralded guy. His coaches have all left. Justin Stepp left Arkansas to go to South Carolina. That was his position coach. And then all of a sudden, he converts to tight end last year. And he was still really small for a tight end last year, but he was playing the tight end spot and had some really good moments, good flashes. And now this offseason, he's put on 30 pounds. He looks the part of an SEC tight end now. And he goes out and has 6 catches for 75 yards and 2 touchdowns in game 1 against Cincinnati. So he looks like he's going to be a dude. And one of my bold predictions before the season was that Arkansas was going to have 3 different players lead the 3 major receiving categories: receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. Mm-hmm. And I think between those 4 guys, I wouldn't surprise me if a different guy led each category, although Trey Knox led all 3 of them this past weekend.
Yeah, that kind of actually leads me right into my next question. You were talking about the various weapons they have there. Is there a go-to top receiver among this group at this point, or is it kind of one of these offenses where they just feel like they can kind of spread the love and maybe feel decent about all of them? My assumption was that, and this is honestly just kind of going off the recruiting rankings too, I kind of thought Hazelwood would be like the alpha of the group. But I actually remember Warren Thompson, he was pretty highly rated too. He took an official to South Carolina. Seems like it was 10 years ago, but who of this bunch is the leader? Or it sounds like from your prediction, maybe just all these guys kind of can go make some plays for you.
Yeah, that's the thing is everyone was wondering, is there going to be a guy that steps up and fills Traylon Burke's shoes? Because that's some pretty big shoes to fill. And honestly, I really don't see one guy doing that. I know Sam Pittman back in the spring had mentioned Hazelwood as the guy they were hoping would be that guy. But I really don't see one guy. Now, this could change, in a few weeks. But as of right now, going into this South Carolina game, I really see that core group, the 3 starting wide receivers, and you could even throw Keytron Jackson, a 4-star recruit that actually came straight to Arkansas from high school as the 4th wide receiver in that mix, and then throw in Trey Knox at tight end. And I really see them all kind of spreading the wealth. I really don't see one dominant guy. That could change, as I said, but yeah, I see them spreading the wealth, and I think that's good for KJ because it really kind of teaches him to go through his progressions and not just, okay, well, so-and-so's covered up, I'm going to go find my go-to guy, like he did last year at Berks.
Yeah, and man, you mentioned Kendall Briles, obviously Barry Odom on the defensive side of the ball. 2 guys that I think are just well-respected minds in college football. How have you seen this Briles offense maybe just get molded and adjusted and tweaked the last couple of years? And what can Gamecock fans expect, just as far as kind of the overall feel or identity of this Arkansas offense?
Well, this is an offense that really wants to beat you with the run. I know that may surprise people because everyone's got this preconceived notion of Kendall Briles as he's just going to throw it all over the field and everything like that. But I think it really all starts with the run game. You got to remember Sam Pittman is the head coach, a former offensive line coach who just really wants to run the ball. I mean, look at the last drive of the Cincinnati game. Arkansas got the ball back with 5:49 on the clock. Cincinnati had 2 of its timeouts left, and they had just scored to make it a 1-touchdown game. Arkansas never gave the ball back. They were able to run off the last 5:49 without having to put the ball in the air. That is kind of what Arkansas would like to do. They would like to just run right over you. They will play with pace. They're gonna get up to the line and they're gonna snap the ball quick. They're gonna go fast, but they're gonna do it. They're gonna mix in passing, of course, but they really want to beat you with the run game. And they've got a guy in Rocket Sanders at running back who ran for 117 yards against Cincinnati. He's a sophomore. This is his first true full year as a running back. Like last year, he came to Arkansas as a 4-star wide receiver, recruited by Justin Stepp. And as soon as he got to campus as an early enrollee, they were like, hey, we need you in the running back room, so we're going to move you to running back. And so last year, he was still kind of learning the position and still ran for like 500 yards, something like that. Really good season. I think he's going to take that next step and be a true kind of stud this year. I wasn't sure if he was going to get a big enough workload to be a 1,000-yard rusher because I do think they have really good, talented guys in A.J. Green, Rashad Dubinion, a true freshman. Dominique Johnson, if he's healthy, he's a guy that I'm still kind of status up in the air for this weekend against South Carolina. If he does play, probably not going to be a ton. He was their starter at the end of last year. So that's a pretty good running back group. But then again, Rocket goes out and carries the ball 20 times against Cincinnati while the other guys don't get more than a handful of carries. I was a little bit surprised by the distribution there. If that continues, then I could see Rocket easily being a 1,000-yard rusher. So they've got a lot of talent on that offense, and they really want to run the ball. Of course, throw in what KJ can do on the ground. And there's a reason Arkansas led the Power 5 in rushing yards per game last season. And I think they would like to do that again this year.
Yeah, Rocket Sanders, another guy South Carolina recruiting fans should be familiar with. Arkansas beat out the Gamecocks. Ironically, like you said, it was Justin Stepp beating them out for him. Also a member of the all-name team. If your name's Rocket, you're probably pretty good. Similarly, Bumper Pool. I mean, you have to be good with a name like that. What can you tell us about him and Arkansas's defense and what you've seen from them so far?
Yeah, Bumper Pool is a super senior, as we've kind of dubbed him here, as the guys that came back with that extra COVID year. He has assuming he doesn't get hurt, he's going to break the the Arkansas school record for career tackles, probably by midseason. He had 13 tackles against Cincinnati. He's just kind of that leader, that middle linebacker leader of the defense. But they they lost Grant Morgan, who again was a super senior last year, former walk-on turned All-American. He's gone, which was a huge piece of their defense. But they do have Bumper Pool back, which is huge. And then they also added Drew Sanders, a transfer from Alabama, former 5-star recruit. He's a guy that I personally think could even be better than Bumper Pool just based on his skill set. He's a guy that's actually going to rush the passer. I see him racking up a bunch of sacks. I see him doing a whole lot of different things. He's enabled this defense to be a lot more versatile. Last year, Arkansas either lined up in a 4-2-5 nickel or a 3-2-6 dime package, and they pretty much stuck with one or the other in a single game. Against Cincinnati, they went back and forth between those two packages, and they also added a 3-3-5 where Drew Sanders is that third linebacker kind of lined up as a stand-up edge rusher. He got one sack, but he was really close on a couple others, and the one sack he had was pretty impressive if people want to go back and look at it. He beat the offensive lineman and then ran right through a running back that tried to get in his way and got after the quarterback. So I think he's really, really good. The defense is hurting. You see here the lead story on Best of Arkansas Sports is Jalen Catalon and Miles Slusher, two of the top defensive backs, went down with injuries in that opener against Cincinnati. I would be shocked if either one of them play this weekend. Doesn't look good long term either, but we haven't really heard anything. We don't even know exactly what the injuries are, but Catalon missed half of last season with a shoulder injury that needed surgery, and I think that might be what he maybe re-injured this time, but there's been all sorts of conflicting information. Miles Slusher, it could be a concussion, could be something else. Who knows? But again, I would be shocked if he plays this weekend. That makes him pretty thin in the secondary. So going up against an offense like Spencer Rattler and what South Carolina wants to do makes me a little bit nervous because they have guys to fill in. I think Jayden Johnson, a sophomore that played a little bit last year, is going to fill in at nickel. You've got Latavius Brainy, the transfer from Georgia, started quite a few games on Georgia's defense last year. That was really good, historically good. He's going to fill in at safety for Catalon. So you got guys that can fill in, but if any of those guys go down and get hurt in this game, then I would be very, very concerned because they just have no depth at this point because those are their top two backups that are now thrust into starting positions. So that's probably the biggest maybe concern with Arkansas's defense right now.
Yeah, so is Jayden Johnson probably a starter if those guys can't go?
Yeah, Jayden Johnson is definitely going to start at nickel. He's listed as a backup safety on the depth chart, and that's where I think they would like to play him. But he played a lot of nickel last year as a backup. He even started a couple of games as a true freshman. But he'll play the nickel, assuming Miles Slusher can't play, which, I would be shocked if he does.
Yeah, that's a former Gamecock commitment, Jayden Johnson. And I think it's a trend. It's not just here, it's there as well. Andrew, injury information is like fewer and further between than it's ever been. You don't actually ever know. I'm sure y'all hear things and then you hear something else, as you said. So, injury updates, not always. Our fans complain about that like all the time now, it seems like. Hey, I know I told you 20 minutes, man. Do you have time for a couple more questions?
Yeah, I should be good. Yep,
okay,
I'm good.
Awesome. Wanted to make sure. So defensively, there's kind of, and we were just kind of talking about it, there's been a sense from the South Carolina side, South Carolina fan base of, hey, if South Carolina is going to win this game, attacking in the secondary, getting Rattler going, like Rattler having a big game, sort of almost has to be the path for Carolina. Is that overblown a bit, or do you kind of? It sounds like you may agree that if there is a weakness on this Arkansas group, it may be in the secondary.
I 100% agree with that, especially with these injuries. Even without the injuries, I would say they're a little bit susceptible to the deep ball. Dwight McGlothern, a transfer from LSU, had a big time interception early on in the Cincinnati game. Hudson Clark is a former walk-on who made national headlines a couple of years ago when he intercepted 3 passes against Ole Miss, and Sam Pittman gave him a scholarship because I think he earned it. Those are your starting corners, and they're both pretty good. McGlothern, I think, is really good, and Hudson Clark is vastly improved from where he has been. But they both at times got beat on the deep ball, and if Cincinnati's quarterback, Ben Bryant, had been more accurate on a couple of those, then we could be talking about a completely different, result last weekend. Because there were definitely some deep shots that they missed. So I think with a guy like Spencer Rattler, who I think is a lot better than Ben Bryant, that could be a challenge for Arkansas. But of course, I don't know what the defensive scheme Barry Odom's going to draw up for this type of game. He's very good. I will say this about Barry Odom is he tailors his defense to whatever the opposing offense is trying to do. He's not one of those coaches that's going to be stuck in, okay, this is my defense, I'm going to run no matter what the other team does. He is very multiple, and he will mix it up. So I'm anxious to see kind of how they go about it. We've seen them in the very limited viewing periods we've gotten running that 3-2-6 I talked about, that dime defense with the 6th defensive back out there. But again, they're so thin in that secondary, running 6 DBs all the time could be a little bit tricky.
Yeah, interesting thought, man. That may be kind of one of those keys within the game. Most teams last year, and then this past week, Georgia State, they sort of took an approach of, we're going to sort of just, even with Rattler, stack the box and just shut down South Carolina's running game, and then sort of put them in these 2nd and 3rd and long situations. And then their line kind of hasn't really been able to protect that well when they've been in those situations. It'll be interesting. If Arkansas sort of just backs out, plays a bunch of DBs, can they stop the run kind of without bringing a guy into the box? Or, does that open it up for South Carolina to then run the ball a little bit more? And, kind of that chess match, I think, of how much you have to devote an extra guy in the secondary versus an extra guy in the box may kind of be a little interesting chess match to watch in this contest. Final question, Andrew, how do you see this thing playing out? What are your sort of keys on both sides? Again, the teams the last year in one game, the teams that have shut down Carolina's running game have kind of had their way. I'll sort of give you a leading question as well. Does Arkansas seem like a team that can shut down teams' rushing attacks?
I think, there were times last year where even in a 3-man front, they were able to shut down a really good rushing attack. The Texas game comes to mind where they really limited Bijan Robinson, who is an absolute stud. Can they do that this year? Is their defensive line last year they had a guy named John Ridgway who transferred in from the FCS ranks and was just a space eater in the middle of that defensive line. Really good against the run. Now he's with the Cowboys, got drafted. Can they do that this week? They brought in some more transfers. Terry Hampton from Arkansas State, really impressive in the first week. Can he do that against this South Carolina rushing attack? I'm anxious to see that. They brought in some transfer defensive ends that I think are pretty talented, and Jordan Dominic and Landon Jackson. So there's some guys I think are. There's still a lot of question marks, I guess is what I'm saying. Like, can they stop that run? I'm not 100% sure, but I would say a big time key is whether or not they can contain Spencer Rattler. Sam Pittman has talked quite a bit about how good Spencer Rattler is whenever he gets out of the pocket and is throwing on the run. And against this secondary that Arkansas showed last week, kind of scares me a little bit. Because of that, I think it's going to be a really close game. I don't know what the point spread is now. I know it opened at like 9.5 or something. I was like, whoa. That seems pretty high to me. I wouldn't pick Arkansas to cover that. I see it being a 1-possession game. I think Arkansas wins because I think Arkansas is the better team at the moment. Plus, it's in Fayetteville. Maybe it's a different story in Columbia. But I've got Arkansas winning, but I think it's going to be a barn burner that goes down in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, I think it's right around 8.5 now is the line last I saw. So I don't know. I think that sounds about right. I think it's a pretty tight game as well, but you probably it's fair to give Arkansas the edge on paper, I think, at this point. So we'll see, man. And I agree 1,000%. The key from a South Carolina perspective, Rattler, can he get outside the pocket and make plays versus can Arkansas sort of keep him contained? Just watching him in one game, man, that's where he is comfortable making big plays outside the pocket. So, Andrew, man, we appreciate it. This was great information. We appreciate you taking the time. For everybody out there, it's bestofarkansassports.com. You can get the complete Arkansas view on that. Hey, man, enjoy the game. Hopefully it's a good one on both sides, and we'll talk to you soon, okay?
Sounds good anytime, and hope anyone making the trip over has safe travels.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. Again, that's Andrew Hutchinson, best of ArkansasSports.com. Y'all go check it out. Read all about the Arkansas Razorbacks. Excellent stuff from him. Man, we are batting 1,000 on the guests. Like, these guys have been fantastic. They know their teams. Not to brag on us for getting the guests, but to brag on their information. Again, Chris is traveling. He is on the way to Arkansas right now. It is just me. I'm not going to sit here and just blab on for the next 30 minutes. So we'll probably do a very short show. We'll have our final thoughts on the game tomorrow. Chris is going to pop in. And then, of course, Kendall Smith, the excellent Kendall Smith, will be on with me with the Before the Sandstorm. I think we're going to do that on a little bit earlier, but that'll be Saturday morning at some point. Just kind of final thoughts on the matchup, final thoughts on the game then. But yeah, that was great stuff. I'll tell y'all, and if y'all have questions, I'll stay on, depending on how many questions we have, throw them out. If you have any, I'll stay on, I don't know, the next 5 or 10 minutes if y'all got a bunch. But we always like to sort of give a little breakdown on what we heard, thoughts on what Andrew had to say. I mean, I'll say this, y'all. It kind of is what you thought it would be. Like, I think our impression going in was that KJ Jefferson, again, not that the whole offense for them is him, because they have weapons. I think that's the scary part, is they put enough around KJ Jefferson that he does not have to do it all. However, if it starts with him, you know what I mean? Like, he is their leading passer and rusher last season. I think Rocket Sanders, the excellent running back for them, takes a little bit of that pressure off of him in the running game. But if you're going to slow them down, if you're going to hold them down, you've got to limit KJ Jefferson. He's going to get his yardage, but you have to at least keep him under control, if that makes sense. And I think I always like to look at a game, how many points, like from a defensive standpoint, this is purely from a South Carolina standpoint, how many points do you need to score? Sometimes you go into a game, if you were playing Tennessee, for example, you go into that game saying they're going to score their points. The offense is going to have a big day. Other games you go into saying, hey, points are going to be at a premium, but maybe you're facing a team that doesn't have a great offense. You say, hey, 24 points may do it. I look at this game, maybe the defense surprises me, because I think the defense did play very, very well on Saturday looking back. I think the defense played even better than maybe we gave them credit for looking back. How many points wins? Does South Carolina have to score 31 points to win this game? They have to score 28. That's the two numbers that come to mind for me. 27, 28, 31. That Trey says 28. Can they hold them to that number? Can they win a 28-27, 28-24 type game? It's going to be somewhere in there, I think. Carolina's got to start fast, y'all. They have not started fast on the road. That's got to change. They've found rhythm at times on the road, but they haven't started fast enough. So you can say that in any game, but certainly on the road, at some point it becomes a trend. They got to start a little bit faster, in my opinion. But yeah, somewhere around that high 20s, low 30s is where I see the winner of this game being. Peter asking, any particular reason Van only played around 25 snaps last season? Peter, I don't have an exact specific answer for you. I think, for one, Van appeared to be banged up and limited in preseason. He was held out of scrimmages, according to Shane Beamer. And, I think you look at Jalen Brooks. They preach in this program competition at all times. And that's not just lip service. I think you look at what Jalen Brooks did. I know a lot of people, or at least some people, were kind of like, why is there that or between Jalen Brooks' name and Josh Van's name? And really, the answer on that is that Jalen Brooks went out there and earned it. And then in the game itself, Jalen Brooks made big plays for South Carolina. So, I mean, I can think of, there were three off the top of my head. Of course, the one that's kind of circulating around everywhere where Rattler rolled out, throws the deep ball. Jalen lays out for it. There was a shallow cross that went for a big play. There was the other catch where Jalen reached behind his head and caught the ball. So I think some of that is just riding the hot hand. There was an or there for a reason. Very interesting. If you looked on the field for the very first play of the game, it was 13. It was Jalen Brooks that was on the field at wide receiver. And those two guys, not that they can't play different positions. Josh Van can play multiple receiver spots. But if you look at the depth chart, the two of them are at the same spot. I believe that's the X spot, but it's definitely an outside receiver spot. So the way Brooks plays and has been playing can directly influence Josh Van's snaps. Let's see. Matthew says, does it change everything if CBS plays? That's been a topic of conversation this week. What difference will CBS make? Christian Bill Smith, of course. Matthew, I don't think it changes everything. And the reason I say that is because I thought Marshawn Lloyd looked really good, really explosive, against Georgia State. I think Jaheim Bell, especially as a short yardage back, gives you something somewhat dynamic at that position as well. So I didn't feel like running back was a problem. Does it help? Would you rather have CBS than not have him? Of course. He's a guy who's going to fall forward, not a flashy runner, but runs really hard. Can probably get better and better as the game goes on. 100, et cetera, et cetera. There's a bunch of reasons why they recruited him. They wanted to add another veteran back. There's a reason he is here. So he does help. That said, I don't think it just changes everything. I think South Carolina just has to block better across the board. It's not a shot at the offensive line. I'm not going to trash them. It's more just across the board. O-line, tight ends, running backs in pass pro, receivers on the outside. Blocking has to be better. And maybe I'm a fool. Maybe y'all look back and be like, fool me once, fool me twice. But I feel like the blocking will be better this week. I know there may not be necessarily a ton of evidence of that or reasons to think that. I have a gut feeling. I got a feeling these guys have heard all week long people telling them that they suck. And I think they're going to respond this week and that it's going to look a good bit better offensively. And maybe we're having a different conversation next week. Let's see. Can we afford not to spy every down? That's a good question, man. When you spy a lot, it can get you in trouble because it's a numbers game. If you spy, that's one guy that can't be in coverage or can't be rushing the passer. I think you'd rather not have to spy. You'd hope that you can just get some pressure up front with the 4 and, that you can just win your battles. I think if you win your battles up front defensively, then you don't have to spy. However, there certainly will be times when I think that's a valid approach, a valid sort of just approach to slowing down KJ. I think this is a big game for the linebackers. I think the linebackers have taken a step forward this year. I thought obviously Mo Kaba. Those who listen to the show know Chris and I have been bragging on Mo for a while. It was awesome to see that sort of confirmed and see Mo go have a great game. I think this is a nice, big first SEC test for Mo as the true middle linebacker. Brad Johnson, defensive MVP, according to Shane Beamer. So he had a big game. I thought Debo Williams has shown improvement. And I actually believe from what I've heard, that you will see Shirai Green in the rotation. I know there was some surprise last week when he was not out there. I think you will see 44 get into the rotation this week. We'll see if I'm right on that. Michael said, thought Amos's size would have helped against a smaller Georgia State team. Yeah, that's a good point, man. I think Rashad Amos is a guy who can help this program, help this team eventually this year. We would just see how it goes. Let's see. Michael says, any starters out for Arkansas? Michael, do you mean any starters out for Arkansas as like their team, or do you mean any starters out for South Carolina against Arkansas? The Razorbacks themselves have, let's see, what are the kids' names? Miles Slusher and Jalen Catalon. They do have injuries to both those guys. If you missed it earlier, we had Andrew Hutchinson on. He gave a very detailed breakdown on all that. You mean for South Carolina? I'm trying to think. RJ Roderick would be sort of the guy right now that is a starter that is most likely to be out. He is considered questionable for this weekend. If he cannot go, then of course freshman Nick Eamon-Worry will go in his place. And I mean, for a freshman, Nick was fantastic last week. So, you know, I actually, we were talking about this on the radio, 107.5. Could be a big game for Nick Eamon-Worry in terms of shutting down, or if you're looking at the matchup with Trey Knox, their big tight end, who's like 6'5", 245. Nick may be the guy who best matches up with him. So I don't know what South Carolina's approach will be from a scheme standpoint, play calling standpoint on defense, but that may be something to keep an eye on. Got a Hog fan on here. Says, excited for this one. Both teams have a lot of potential. It depends on who shows up on Saturday. Yeah, I agree, man. I think this is an interesting matchup. I know that's we need to ban the word interesting in on this show because I overuse it all the time. I need to think of a better word, but it's an intriguing matchup because I think we learn quite a bit about Arkansas. I think we learned quite a bit about South Carolina this week. Sierra Mike says that guest is a fanboy. If the O-line improves to just average, we win. Their secondary is trash. KJ Jefferson only hit 3 receivers last week. Take the over. You know, I mean, I don't think that's fair to Andrew to call him a fanboy. I mean, I thought he was extremely knowledgeable about Arkansas. Gave us an excellent just overall view, rundown of what to expect from them. So I'm not gonna sit here and bash our guest when he, first of all, took the time, and second of all, provided excellent information. I go back to that point he made about Barry Odom and the fact that he is willing to be very multiple on defense, and how will they approach South Carolina? How will they choose to scheme up South Carolina defensively is, I think, a big key in this game. I'm going to expound on that in a second. I'll take a few more questions. First, I got to tell y'all about our friends at Liberty Tax right here in Columbia, South Carolina, servicing the Midlands area. You can overcome your taxiety, 803-462-5576. It, of course, is not tax time anymore, but they do offer bookkeeping and payroll services for LLCs, S-Corps, and C-Corps. If you owe money to the IRS, they can help you settle your debt. They have a Columbia location that is new at 551 St. Andrews Road, a Lexington office at 1123 South Lake Drive, and in Irmo at 7467 St. Andrews Road. Again, Liberty Tax. Overcome your taxiety, 803-462-5576. So, yeah, I think y'all, hang with me. Got to get my graphic off the screen. I think how Barry Odom, who is a very well-respected defensive coach, how he chooses to defend South Carolina. Do they have that safety back to try and help what is a very porous pass defense for them? And if they do, can South Carolina run the football a good bit better against those too high looks. Again, that means, every team, for the most part, is going to base their defense either with a single high safety or two high safeties. And what that really, really means in just basic football number standpoint is if you have one high safety, that gives you an extra guy in the box. If you have two high safeties, that means that guy is not in the box. So if they're in the box, that's an extra hat to stop the run, an extra player who you're having to account for or block. And most teams, you look at Georgia State, they ran a lot of slants, stunts, very active defensive front, and they would put an extra guy in the box to stop the running game. Arkansas may sit there and say, one, South Carolina struggled to run the football. Two, we need help in the secondary. We're going to put two safeties deep because we're in a situation we need to stop the deep ball and the big play from Spencer Rattler. If that happens, that may open up the ability for South Carolina to run the football. However, if South Carolina still is unable to run the football against two high safeties, then that means they've both taken away some options in the passing game and they've taken away your running game, which in that case, South Carolina's offense will probably get shut down. So that is something I didn't really think about it necessarily coming into this show, but after Andrew talked and just knowing that Odom is kind of a guy who doesn't just stick to the same defensive strategy. He likes to tweak and change his defense based on the opponent. That, to me, is a massive key within the game of this game. All right, y'all. I think that's going to do it for me. Let's see. Hitting y'all's questions one more time. Here's a good one. We'll take one more. C. All says, should they run more scramble plays for Spencer? I feel like he's more comfortable on the move. Wouldn't be a bad thing to just get him outside the pocket. I agree 100%, man. As Marcus Satterfield said, Spencer Rattler's superpower is being outside the pocket on the perimeter and then making plays in the passing game while extending plays. You look at this game, if you're Arkansas's defense, and Andrew told us this, if you are Arkansas's defense, the single biggest concern you have from a coaching staff standpoint is Spencer Rattler getting outside the pocket and creating big plays against you. And I think for South Carolina, that means that's certainly something you should look into trying to do more and trying to put yourself in a position to go do that. Patrick says the play calling in the bowl game is great. Where is that offense? Patrick, if you go back and look at the bowl game, the play calling itself, the plays themselves, probably not that different at all from what you saw South Carolina doing on Saturday. The difference is you're able to run the football. Watch every successful offensive game for a team. Chances are they successfully ran the football. The bowl game, South Carolina was in 2nd and 3. They're in 3rd and 2. They hit big plays down the field. The game last Saturday, they're in 2nd and 9. They're in 3rd and 7. I believe the average depth on third downs was like 3rd and 9 for South Carolina. That is not a recipe to go win games. So it's not necessarily the play calling. And you can blame the OC. That's fine. But the play calling itself, to me, is not necessarily the issue. It is sort of to me, a lot of times it's been execution of the plays, but ultimately I'm not making an excuse. Ultimately, that does fall back on the coordinator. However, to specifically say is the play calling, I don't necessarily think that's the case. Anyway, all right, like I said, I'm going to try to save a few bullets for tomorrow so that we're not just repeating ourselves over and over. That's all I got for today. Appreciate y'all joining us. This was fun. Great interaction. Y'all had great questions, great thoughts. Probably my favorite part about this job is interacting with the fan base and getting to know some of you online and in person, and just hearing your feedback and hearing what y'all think about the game. So load up on your questions. The show tomorrow may be a good bit earlier in the morning. We're still working through that. If it is earlier and you miss us live, just remember you can always watch it on YouTube after the fact. And of course, I post it to the podcast page as well if you want to listen to it. So if you see a little thing pop up tomorrow morning that says we're live, we're going to go ahead and probably do the show early on. And then, like I said, if you miss it, you can always catch it later. Appreciate our sponsors, our friends at Liberty Tax, Clint Hammond. Shout out Gamecock Nation. Appreciate y'all. As always, y'all have a good night, and we'll talk to you very soon.